On a calm summer morning in the year 793 AD, the Viking Age is born. It begins with a raid on the Christian monastery at Lindisfarne, on the northeast coast of England. The attack is swift, savage, unexpected. The pagan raiders know full well that monasteries hold great riches, great, unprotected riches. The news spreads quickly throughout Europe. A new prayer rises in Christian churches. Lord, protect us from the fury of the men of the north. It is a brutal beginning for a remarkable age of adventure and discovery. Over the next 300 years, warriors, farmers, and explorers from Scandinavia venture out to the limits of the world they know and beyond. In the end, the Vikings reshaped the world. The Vikings fascinate us, but some beliefs are simply not true. The Vikings never feared fog. On the contrary, they could take advantage of it when raiding. Nor did the Vikings ever wear those horned helmets, made familiar to us by Wagner's operas, Hollywood, and comic strips. The men from the north weren't all fearsome seafaring warriors either. During the Middle Ages, most people were farmers. The Vikings were no different. At the time of the raid on Lindisfarne, they were setting out to find new riches, fame, and especially new land. In earlier times, the people living in today's Norway, Sweden, and Denmark were mostly known as traders. In the 8th century, this changed rapidly, thanks to a great technological advantage: Viking ships. Viking ships made the Viking Age. Viking warriors and raiders sailed aboard revolutionary longships whose dragon-shaped prowheads inspired terror. Viking traders, explorers, and settlers used a different kind of ship called the Nar. It was made deeper and wider to carry goods, livestock, and people across the ocean. All Viking ships had hulls made of thin, overlapping planks, nailed together and sealed with tar, producing strong yet light and flexible vessels. They were steered by a side rudder hanging on a steer board, the origin of the nautical term starboard. The ships were fast and symmetrical and could reverse their course readily. The longships had a shallow draft, meaning they could sail far up rivers and could be beached easily. Shipbuilding required a variety of skills. Large square sails were woven from linen or thin wool, later waterproofed with fat. On longships in particular, oars were used for precise maneuvers and in windless weather. Shipbuilding was an art, and master shipwrights commanded great respect. Their craftsmanship was legendary. So much so that tales of huge longships carrying 200 warriors were long thought to be the exaggerations of storytellers. Then, in 1997, a longship measuring 120 feet and capable of carrying 180 men was unearthed in Roskilde, Denmark. The giant longships had indeed existed. These ships give Vikings a strong superiority at sea, and thousands of them head out in search of wealth, land, and glory. In 2 centuries, the Norse, Danes, and Swedes, or Rus as they are known in the East, are everywhere in Europe. They take over large areas of England and Scotland as well as Ireland, where they found Dublin. In France, the Northmen take over a region of France that becomes known as Normandy. Viking raids reach as far south as the Mediterranean. To the east, the Rus use rivers to reach the Middle East, creating a 1,000-mile trading network and founding their own kingdom, Russia. Success makes the Vikings even more ambitious. Large fleets mount major attacks. The city of Paris must pay an enormous tribute to be spared. Soon after, a great Viking army conquers York and much of eastern England. In the east, the Vikings attack Constantinople, today's Istanbul, with fleets of hundreds of ships. Twice, the great city resists, but the Byzantine emperors are so impressed that they hire Viking warriors as an imperial guard. Europeans sometimes come largely as raiders and warriors. Out west, they become mainly settlers and explorers. They have the North Atlantic to themselves. After settling several small islands, they find a huge land where only a handful of Irish monks has ever set foot. There, the Vikings build a new world. Legend has it that a man suffered an extremely harsh winter on this island and that he vengefully named it Iceland. Yet, Vikings from Norway and the British Isles came in droves to this unspoiled country, a country sculpted by volcanic forces and immense glaciers. Iceland is a place of otherworldly beauty, an island of mountains, lava plains, sandy beaches, and deep valleys. It is a supernatural land, a land of the gods. In Iceland, the Vikings, farmers above all, find what they treasure most: abundant, fertile land. By coming to Iceland, many Vikings are also fleeing the rise of self-proclaimed kings in Norway. In a new country, settlers can stake out property using the custom of landnam, or land taking. It allows any free man to claim a lot as large as he can walk around in a day. In a few decades, all of Iceland is settled in this manner.
I am Leif the Lucky, son of Eric. I was born on a farm in Iceland. There, I learned the skills and customs of my people. I learned to praise virtues like wisdom, courage, and justice, and to honor warriors, poets, and artists. Art is ever present in our lives. It enhances everything from our most prized possessions to the most common objects. My family and my clan have always been my pride. Like every Viking, I have strived to excel in diverse skills: warfare, farming, craftsmanship, seafaring. Like every Viking, I hope to gain the most desirable thing, a favorable reputation, for only fame is undying for those who win it. I hoped our poets, the Skalds, would tell our story with well-chosen words, generation after generation.
Vikings put as much value in the telling of stories and the reciting of poetry as in the skills of warriors. And although they had an alphabet called runes, history and tradition relied essentially on the spoken word. Fortunately, 2 centuries after Leif, learned Icelanders wrote down these tales, including Leif's own story. Together they are known as the Icelandic sagas. The word saga simply means what was said. The sagas contain a blend of history, poems, myth, and religious fables. They tell us how the Vikings lived and what mattered most in their lives. The thousands of beautifully handwritten pages of the saga manuscripts are a cornerstone of Viking heritage. The sagas are among the most important documents of the Middle Ages. They are kept in a secure vault and are under the permanent responsibility of the saga keepers. One story of interest is recounted in 2 sagas. A major turning point came when a few neighboring chieftains, each ruling over several families, gathered in a Viking assembly called a thing. This assembly acted as a local tribunal, resolved disputes, and if needed, decided punishment. In the year 930 AD, 36 chieftains, representing all such assemblies in Iceland, came together at a site called Thingvellir. There, they created the Althing, a national assembly that defined the laws of the land. Every summer, when it met, a law speaker would recite the code from memory, adding any new laws or rulings. It remains the longest-running national assembly in the world.
Many came freely to Iceland. Eric, my father, had little choice. He was banished from Norway for a killing he couldn't defend. My father was a quick-tempered man who had all the qualities of a leader. Feared or respected, he was Eric the Red.
In Iceland, Eric marries into a rich family descended from Irish kings and gains in reputation. But as the sagas tell us, Eric cannot escape his fiery nature. A dispute with a neighbor turns violent. People on both sides are killed. Eric is brought before the assembly.
My father had as many supporters as opponents, but law prevailed. Eric the Red was banished from Iceland for 3 years. Eric, my father, made the best out of his exile. He headed for an unnamed land out west, a place seen by some sailors who had been blown off course.
Vikings sailed without maps or compasses. They relied on landmarks, the sun, the stars, the presence of seabirds, and the color of the water. Despite that, they often got lost. Sailors sometimes used ravens, mythical messengers of the Norse god Odin. Within 200 miles of land, a raven released into the sky would head towards it. Unknown to Eric, his destination was in fact the largest island in the world. For 3 years, Eric explored the island's western coast. The climate at the time was warmer than today. Icebergs abounded, but fjords weren't clogged up by ice during winter. "85% of this island is covered by ice up to 2 miles thick. The land is harsh, mountainous, and barren. But Eric discovered areas of fertile land around the southwestern fjords. Eric did find traces of human occupation, but no one was there to challenge his rule. To make the place sound appealing to a community of farmers, Eric named the island Greenland. When his exile ended, Eric returned to Iceland and gathered volunteers to settle the land with him.
Hundreds of people filled 25 ships with everything they could carry to start a new life in a place they had never seen. They had faith in Eric the Red. Our journey did not go quite as well as we had hoped. Only 14 of our ships reached the coast of Greenland. 11 either turned back or were lost. We did not turn back. My father would not give up the infinite promise of this new land.
During his exile, Erik explored what became known today as Erik's Fjord. There, he had found some of the most fertile land in Greenland. It is from this place, called Brattahlid, the steep slope, that Erik ruled Greenland. Under his leadership, the westernmost Viking settlement became a thriving colony. At the same time, Vikings everywhere were becoming Christians. Erik's wife, Tjodild, had a chapel built on their farm and raised her children in the new faith. But Erik remained faithful to the Norse gods.
We were still new to Greenland when a man named Bjarni arrived at Brattahlid. Sailing from Iceland to Greenland, Bjarni got lost in a fog and drifted far to the west. He had come close to 3 unknown lands, but never put ashore. This moment changed my life. It took 15 years for my time to come. I had earned the respect of my peers, and I had the temperament to lead. Yet I still had to make a name for myself, a name to surpass even that of Erik the Red. I bought the very ship Bjarni had sailed, and gathered volunteers to retrace his journey. I had dreamed of these new lands since childhood. I could only hope it would be worth the trip.
Leif and his crew first saw a rocky and icy land without trees or meadows. Unlike Bjarni, Leif was eager to go ashore. He called the land Helluland, or Flat Rocks Land. They next found a land of vast forests touching the sea. This was of great interest for people from a country like Greenland, where a tree was no taller than a man. They came ashore. Leif named the territory Markland, or Forest Land. For more than a day, Leif and his crew sailed the coast of Markland along extraordinary stretches of white sandy beaches. The sagas called them the Wonder Beaches.
We reached yet another land. Coming ashore, we saw dew on the grass, collected it in our hands, and drank it. We had never tasted anything as sweet. I decided we would build our camp nearby.
The sagas tell us that, as they explored this region, they found great grassy fields and grapevines with sweet grapes. There was no snow, and even in winter, the sun stayed high in the sky for many hours a day. Leif named this new land Vinland. But centuries later, scholars wondered, was there really a Helluland, a Markland, and especially a Vinland? In the 19th century, many interpretations of the sagas emerged. Looking for places where wild grapes could grow, scholars first looked towards Cape Cod, then Newport, Rhode Island, and even New York City. Others later proposed that the Gulf of the St. Lawrence River or the coasts of Nova Scotia could have been Vinland. The Vinland sagas contained conflicting information about who found what and where. And there was no proof to be found. Skeptics wondered if the sagas could be trusted at all. Most people still thought that Christopher Columbus had discovered America, just like all the textbooks said. One Norwegian couple, explorer Helge Ingstad and archaeologist Anne Steen Ingstad, set out to resolve the Vinland mystery. In 1953, Helge Ingstad first sailed to Eric the Red's Brattahlid, where he started thinking that Vinland might be further north than previously thought. His impressions were reinforced by the Skalholt map. Drawn up in 1590, it shows Greenland, a Helluland and a Markland, as well as a Vinland promontory, remindful of Newfoundland's great northern peninsula. In the summer of 1960, Helge Ingstad sailed along the coast of Newfoundland. In every little fishing village, he asked about old sites and drew only puzzled looks. But when he got to his last port of call, Los Meadows, a fisherman named George Decker mentioned old Indian ruins. As he saw the traces in the ground, Ingstad was instantly reminded of the Norse sites he had seen in Greenland. 1,000 years had put only 6 inches of dirt over the foundations of 3 Viking houses and 5 small buildings. Anne Steen Ingstad led 7 years of archaeological digs at Los Meadows. She found indisputable evidence that this was a Viking settlement. Carbon testing dated the site to the year 1000, the time when Leif Erikson was said to have traveled to Vinland. The sagas had it right. Leif's itinerary became clear. Baffin Island was Helluland and Labrador Markland. There, Leif Erikson had set foot in America nearly 500 years before Columbus. Using Los Meadows as a gateway, the Vikings would sail across the Gulf of St. Lawrence into a vast region called Vinland.
I had high hopes for Vinland and the promise it held as a new Viking settlement. I spent a year exploring and gathering supplies before returning to Greenland. But there, within a few years, my father, Eric the Red, died, and I became chieftain. I never returned to Vinland.
Still more expeditions follow, including one led by Leif's brother, Thorvald. Only a few women make the journey to North America, including one known as Gudrid the Well-Traveled. While in Vinland, Gudrid gives birth to a baby boy named Snorri. He is the first European born in North America, and the only one for another 500 years. Over the course of a decade or so, relatives of Leif's family come to Lanse Meadows several times. Thorvald's expedition reveals an extraordinary fact. In these new lands, the Vikings are not alone. And for humankind, this encounter has an exceptional meaning. Since the dawn of humanity, our human ancestors had been migrating around the Earth. They crossed Europe and Asia, entered the Americas, and traveled as far as they could. When the Vikings landed in North America, humankind had come full circle around the planet. When Vikings and natives looked into each other's eyes, the world became smaller than ever before. Relations between Vikings and natives eventually turned into conflict. One saga tells us that Thorvald Eriksson once attacked 9 natives as they slept. 8 were killed, but 1 escaped. The natives struck back. Thorvald's death showed that conflict with the natives was a serious obstacle to a permanent Viking settlement. Oscar Wilde said that the Vikings discovered America, but had the good sense to lose it again. He was only half right. Vikings regularly returned to Labrador to gather supplies, especially lumber. Evidence shows that they had regular contact with the ancestors of the Inuit people. Meanwhile, the Viking homelands were now ruled by Christian kings, much like other European countries. In places like Normandy, England, or Russia, the Vikings blended in with local populations until they could no longer truly be called Vikings. Ironically, it was a Viking descendant who put an end to the Viking Age in Europe. Duke William of Normandy led an army of French knights, not Viking raiders, to defeat English King Harold at the Battle of Hastings in 1066 AD. The event is immortalized in the Bayeux Tapestry, an amazing 230-foot-long embroidered narrative. Viking Greenland lived on for nearly 5 centuries after the Vinland voyages. Greenlanders traded precious goods like walrus ivory and falcons. But farming slowly declined as the climate turned colder. Adapting might have meant living more like the Inuit, but the Greenlanders insisted on living like Europeans. The last recorded event in Greenland is a wedding at Valsey Church on September 16, 1408. A few decades later, the Vikings had disappeared from Greenland. In places like Iceland, Viking settlements withstood the test of time. There, something of the Viking culture still survives. In their untamed, otherworldly island, Icelanders speak a language that the Vikings would have understood. School children read the sagas as they were written centuries ago. It is an invaluable connection with their past. More than their warrior image and wide-ranging conquests, the Vikings' most valuable heritage is found in their love for words, their passion for memory, their sense of beauty, and their powerful drive to explore the world in search of a better place to live and prosper. The worldwide and sustained fascination for the Vikings endures. Thousands of companies, products, sports teams, and even space probes bear the name Viking. It is a badge of honor, a symbol of conquest and exploration. The best of the Viking spirit sails on.